Moving on to the issue of consumer protection, passenger claims. A couple of days ago, talking to another client whom I see is among the participants in this webinar, so I hope he won't mind if I quote him. He told me that in this crisis, we are now all feeling that the 15 or 20 euro that the ticket costs are really worth a lot of money because we're having absolutely no revenue. And people are asking us for that money as well. So Jaime, you have been, and you are heavily involved in this kind of matters. What's the perspective? How do you see this? What's going on?
Well, thank you very much, Sergi, for your introduction and the opportunity to take part in this webinar. Well, first of all, I want something which is very interesting for me is numbers, figures, because I think that they let us take more intelligent decisions. It's kind of the driver for our decisions are somehow the numbers, not only the concepts. Here in this situation, we are facing the biggest impact in the industry of the whole story, in terms of revenues that are going to be lost during this year. We can expect figures by IATA around 90 billion euros losses during this year. And worse than that is that, as you mentioned before, we are moving now in a very uncertain scenario for next year. There might be expectations, but it doesn't look as reasonable bet that we are recovering situation of 2019 before 2021 or 2022, the soonest. So in this situation, the problems that we are facing in consumer protection discussion are even worse than before. Because it's now really going to be hard with this level of losses to refund this 20 euro ticket. Regardless the right that this passenger might have, which is something that I would like to discuss as well. But the global amount of this 20 euro ticket, in the case of a low cost, is the calculations of IATA is more than 30 billion euros in refunds, 30 billion euros in refunds, which might imply a significant risk against the sustainability of the airlines. So we would all share the view that if we don't have airlines because they are not sustainable, we don't have passengers, we don't have passenger rights. So I think it's good, good idea to keep in mind when we consider how national authorities, state members, but also Commission are becoming aware of the situation and taking some measures, which, in my opinion, that's not still the end of the story. We will need and see how it's going to progress, especially in relation to the ticket refund. I'm now just trying to cover two or three main issues of our passenger protection regulation that, as you know, is covered in very popular 261 regulation. First of all is the right to care assistance that's had to be rendered at the very beginning of the situation, because that was an issue that's not really an issue anymore, maybe not right now, but this right to care was a critical issue at the beginning. Then the Commission helped the aviation when said at the beginning, those were guidelines issued by the Commission in March, saying that, confirming that right to care was applicable even when there was this very big disruption, which was somehow anyway insisting on the concept of the regulation itself and some precedents of the European Court of Justice. However, the Commission said also that the principle of proportionality had to be considered. This is a key idea here. We need to be proportional. We need to make a reasonable interpretation of the consumer protection now, because otherwise I insist the risk that we all get crazy. We try to protect passengers in terms of right to care during 2 or 3 months before they can get to final destination, and this would not make any sense at all. That's why Commission ruled those guidelines, which were helpful in in this regard. Then there's another concept which is also very critical in consumer protection, which is the right to compensation. It's clear now, but at the beginning there was huge discussions, especially because of, I insist, because of the amount under discussion there, whether EU 261 compensations, the set amount, the fixed sum, were going to be applicable or not. Well, the Commission as well, and also some national authorities confirmed that COVID-19 was clearly a situation beyond the control of airlines, and even when they had taken reasonable measures according to EU 261 regulation, the situation or the effects of that situation could not have been avoided. Therefore, no way, no chance to compensation. But again, in addition to that, the compensation was very useful when saying that it didn't affect only flights that had to be canceled because of a legal prohibition, but also some other situations that at that time made the airline have clear doubts on whether operating or not a certain flight. So it was very open in the description of the scope of the extraordinary circumstance that would exclude liability. And this is the second idea, which is very important. And then the third issue, which is the ticket refund, which is hot topic now, as you might know, because of the importance of the amounts, the global amount and the discussion. That's something that I consider that is open because I think that, as Laura was saying at the beginning, we need an harmonized solution to something which is subject to an harmonized regulation. In many other areas, national authorities could take measures because they had national competence in healthy measures or many other measures of movement of people. In consumer protection, our regulation is an European regulation, set basically EU 261. And then it's going to be the Commission at the end or at some point in potential review of 261, which is, as you know, under assessment now, that we will need fixed rules in order to cover, maybe in a better way, situation like that we are facing now. However, what's the situation now? Some national authorities, some member states like Italy or Spain, they are taking measures in order to try to protect airlines. Particularly, I'd like to give the floor to Laura to explain this measure in Italy, because it was very surprising and very interesting for the industry. In case of Spain, we had a 60-day period to have negotiations before obliging airlines to refund the tickets, which was also very interesting. And in the case of the Commission, initially they received a letter from some state members, was around 12 or 13 state members claiming the Commission to take measures in order to allow the vouchers instead of the refund. And the Commission has very recently addressed the issue somehow against the state members, trying to have clarifications on whether they are going to take measures in this line, because that might be a kind of infringement of EU 261. So there's this kind of fight between the interest of airlines, which clearly support the idea of vouchers instead of refund, the efforts by some state members in order to promote vouchers instead of refunds, and the situation of the Commission, which is still to be done. And that's kind of political situation of this controversial issue. In addition, I think that there is going to be a legal issue as well, maybe in the next month, on the interpretation of EU 261 in this regard, Section 8, which is not, in my opinion, this is not absolutely clear, that airlines have a real obligation to refund tickets in current situation when they cannot offer alternative transportation. That's, I mean, in our interpretation, if it's not possible for an airline to provide with alternative transportation, which is letters B and C of the regulation, of Section 8 of the regulation, it shouldn't be obliged to process the refund, which is letter A, with a systematic interpretation of this regulation. So something will come, maybe in the European Court of Justice, or maybe with a change of regulation, which obviously would avoid further problems and further litigation in this regard.
Laura, Jaime mentioned Italy, because the Italian government the Italian authorities have taken their own approach.
Yes, as I mentioned, there has been a focus since the beginning. We had many articles in February already, then this one in April. Starting from the first one, Italy was one of the first countries taking position when it was the cancellation came from the passenger, no? So allowing the voucher when the cancellation was decided by the passenger, even though based on the coronavirus situation. Now with this article 8080 bis of law 27/2020, our government, it is interesting to see that it was a decision from the government, not from the Italian MEB. As you may be aware, our MEB, ENAC, is always very, very sensitive towards the right of passengers. So this decision was inserted in the law decree called Care Italy, Cura Italia, and not in a special provision related to the air transport. The reason why is clear to everybody. I mean, it is to support airlines to avoid that the reimbursement and the cash needed for the reimbursement in a period where they are out of cash would meant their insolvency. Since the beginning, Sergei, you know, because we discussed this several times, I've been always struggled between the clear, disconnection between the high level of protection which is given to the passenger in a normal situation and the total lack of protection in case of insolvency. Because in case of insolvency, the passenger right of reimbursement or 261 indemnity compensation is an unsecured credit, and therefore in normal bankruptcy, unfortunately, we have seen over the years and in recent years, this means that the passenger will get zero out of their payment. So a balance, as always we have said, has to be introduced, and I totally agree with Jaime that this situation of the reimbursement in a moment where airlines are facing really one of the worst crises we have never seen must be resolved at a higher solution, either European or local government, but with the risk to be against 261 or European Commission. But if left to the single airline, it could give rise to zero protection for the passenger, because most of the airline will fail to reimburse because they don't have cash. Vice versa, one could argue, but if the passenger receive a voucher, who's securing the passenger that in future this voucher can really be spent if the airline were to fail? This could be a matter of special funds on the charge of government, insurance, price ticket, I don't know, because this is the risk, of course. Now there is a shortfall in the cash flow for the airlines. In future, there could be a risk for the passenger not to be able to really use the ticket for the voucher received. A balance has to be found, and so certainly I agree with Jaime, further discussion are needed. We cannot simply have this discussion from the recommendation of the EU Commission and local decision like the one of Italy or the Netherlands.
Christina, how does it look in Germany? Has Germany also issued its own laws, regulations, which may be even contrary to European law, like the Italians seem to have done? I'm being very cautious in my formulation, as you can see.
No, actually not, but they are very much lobbying, I mean, at least some politicians and also in the government party lobbying for a voucher solution. And yeah, and try, and as we all know, it's not seen as a solution by the European Commission, but I was on a video conference last Friday, I think it was, with a politician from the government, and it was about how German aviation will evolve. And there he promised at least that they will do their utmost to try to get it to voucher solution, because I mean, I think the number there in place, it's 1.8 billion euros of refunds which European airlines would have to do otherwise. And yeah, it's still open, but at least in Germany we are trying also to get to a better solution, but it should be a unified approach, as we discussed before.